Okay, Mr. Receiver.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Dowry, serving as receiver for the city of Chester. Today is Tuesday. Oh, there's Mayor Kirkland. Great. Today is Tuesday, May 24th, 2022. Gathered here for our Municipal Financial Recovery Advisory Committee meeting, joined today by Mayor Kirkland and Councilman Morgan on behalf of the city of Chester. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Also joined by Director Bracy on behalf of the Governor's Office and the Department of Community and Economic Development. Good afternoon, Director Bracy.
Hello, good to see all of you.
Likewise. And last but not least, on behalf of Delaware County Council, we are joined today by Ms. Kelly Diaz. Ms. Diaz, good morning.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Thank you. All right. Our agenda packet, also joined here today by Chief of Staff, Mr. Kapoor, and Executive Assistant Cody Dill. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Apologies in advance. I'm dealing with some tech issues on my end. Hopefully this connection is stable and everyone is able to hear me. Our agenda packet was distributed towards the end of last week. Hopefully everyone had a chance to receive that and review in preparation for today. There was also an additional PowerPoint presentation that Mr. Kapoor and others were working on up until the last minute here. So that was just recently circulated within the last hour. We'll be going through that document here today, but hopefully everyone has received that and will be able to work through it. All right, so moving through our agenda, calling this meeting to order. Our next item, our presentation is a bit long, so we're going to conclude with that and knock out public comment and other things beforehand. We did not receive any public comment through our conventional channels since the last NPRAC meeting. So no comment there. I think our next agenda item is just to jump into quick updates. Mr. Kapoor, would you like to offer any general updates on our current operations, or would you just defer to the presentation?
If I would, Mr. Receiver, I have quite a bit today in the presentation. I think we'll cover quite a bit in there.
Yeah, it's probably best to just go ahead and jump on. And so I'll defer my comments to the end as well, maybe saying something in conclusion to wrap things up, but I think let's just go ahead and advance to today's presentation. Mr. Kapoor, if you're able to share your screen, would you like to take it from here?
Sure, I'll be happy to do so. Can everybody see what I have on there?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, good afternoon, members of the committee and members of the public. Mr. Receiver, thank you for the opportunity again to be in front of this committee and presenting today on two important areas. One being the possible solutions to the city's financial situation, and the other a discussion involving the parking contract. If the committee remembers, back on May 10th, we had a presentation where I really outlined Chester's financial reality. And I said at that time, we would be coming back on May 24th to talk about possible solutions, possible next steps. So for those folks who weren't there on May 10th or need a refresher, the high level situation of Chester's fiscal reality is the following. Chester has been in financial oversight, state financial oversight, for the last 27 years, 25 of which under a coordinator, the last 2 under a receiver, and unfortunately continues to struggle financially. The city really has an inability to pay an amount of $36.6 million in receivables to pension funds without a significant lump sum payment, and the real only way of doing that is through monetization of the water system. We're also seeing in the city unaffordable increasing annual pension payments. Those are referred to as MMOs, minimum municipal obligations. So when you hear me use that term today, and I'll be using it quite a bit, think about that being the city's annual pension contributions that need to be made. Those are significant and they are growing. Unfortunately, at the May 10th presentation, The number I put in there actually underestimated the MMO cost. I'll be correcting that on the next slide, but the increase for next year is approximately $3 million. And that is not something that the city has the ability to easily absorb, if at all absorb, without some significant impacts on operations. We have a police pension fund that has assets in it equivalent to about 8 months of pension benefits. We've been making some progress on that, but it's nowhere close to being where it needs to be. We have a general fund general fund budget that has only been balanced this year as a result of federal rescue plan funding. And the water system monetization, which I alluded to earlier as being really the only way of being able to kind of address the city's pension situation in any really meaningful way. That is tied up in court with a decision that is not expected until next year. So in terms of first correcting the MMO cost growth and making sure everybody's on the same page in terms of numbers here, in the May 10th presentation, I incorrectly reflected an MMO estimate of $12.5 million for 2023. That correct estimate should have been $13.5 million, and that's reflected correctly here on slide 5. Now, that's an increase of approximately $3 million over 2022, and that also assumes that the city has already deposited that $36.6 million in receivables, which again, as I've said earlier, the city really has no meaningful way of doing that without a significant lump sum payment into the pension plans. It's not something that the city's budget can absorb. So putting this in the context, that $36.6 million owed as receivables is equivalent to about 63% of the city's entire general fund budget for 2022. So basically, to pay that off using operations, we would need to divert about 2 out of every 3 general fund dollars we collect this year just to pay for the receivables. And if folks are still kind of curious about, what do I mean by receivables? Receivables are the amounts of money that the city should have put in MMOs previously, but did not, going back to about 2014. So it's not just the unfunded liability that you hear about in many pension plans. These were MMO pay. These were amounts that should have been paid as part of the MMO, but were not fully paid. And so that's what we mean by receivables. If we look at the receivables and the MMO, again, just this year, that's approximately 81% of the city's entire general fund budget for 2022. So that's about $47 million. Next year, as I said, things will go up by about $3 million. The MMO is going up by about $3 million. We would be looking at, just as a minimum, the minimum obligation that the city would need to put in next year would be about $50 million, which again, when you're looking at a general fund budget of around $58, $60 million, is just not feasible. It's just not feasible. On slide 8, looking at our funded levels, again, these are the pension plans. And again, we reflect here how much money we have in the pension plans, at least as of March 31st of 2022, the liabilities as of January 1st of 2021. So this isn't a complete apples to apples comparison. But again, looking at the police pension fund, we've got assets of around $4.7 million at the end of March. That's again equivalent to about 8 months of pension payments. And so these funded percentages that I have down here, these are overestimated. They're better than what they probably are right now, because we're looking at an older liability instead of a newer liability. And again, we don't have that information because actuaries do these calculations every 2 years. So again, very severe pension situation. And I would dare to say, at least with the police pension fund, we have not seen a pension fund in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in worse financial shape than the City of Chester's police pension fund. We also have some other potential 2022 financial concerns that may impact our budget this year. Any of you from Delaware County who may be watching this are probably well aware of similar situations that other municipalities are facing, at least as with the first bullet point. And that is the city of Chester has been approached by Prospect Crozier regarding the continued provision of ambulance services. To date, the city of Chester we haven't received a discontinuation of service letter, but we expect, like other municipalities have, for Prospect Crozier to request a payment for continuing to provide ambulance services. We don't have a number from Prospect Crozier at that point yet, but obviously that amount is not budgeted in the city's 2022 budget. Another matter also involving Prospect Crozier is that they are seeking to enforce an amount of about $340,000 plus interest against the city for a property tax refund. That has to deal with property valuations and assessments against those properties. That matter is scheduled for a hearing in court on June 16th of this year. So again, that's not an amount of money that the city of Chester has laying around that will be able to divert for some of the other concerns again that we have. And these are, this is a non-exhaustive list, but these are two issues that are I know of certain concern to us as we go forward this year. One question people may be asking is, what about ARPA money? The city did get about $30.3 million. And so how that money is being spent right now is the reason, to be very blunt about it, ARPA is the reason why we're not having this same conversation a year ago. ARPA is what is keeping us, the city, financially afloat. In 2022, we're relying on about $2.9 million in ARPA funds, $2.9 million in ARPA funds, just to balance our 2022 budget. And with ARPA, this is not something that's going to last forever. We're only going to be able to use it for qualifying costs that are incurred basically between March of 2021 and December 31st of 2024. And expended by December 31st of 2026. But the reality is we're not going to be able to, we're going to be able to rely on this money, one, until it runs out, and two, when the time period goes away. And there are restrictions to ARPA funds, including not being able to deposit these funds into pension plans. So we just can't take that $30.3 million, and even if we wanted to, and put it in pension plans. And so in addition to us using these funds to keep the city afloat financially, the city and the receiver are almost finished developing an ARPA plan that is going to plan to use these funds for expenses that are critical to health and safety for employees as well as for residents. And we're going to be jointly presenting this plan to the public soon. We're sort of in our last phases of putting it all together. So I want to talk a little bit about the receiver's responsibilities under Act 47 before we kind of get into some of the news that was made public last week, and also about kind of the next steps here that we see for possible solutions. So under the law, the receiver is appointed, and basically the law that appoints him and the law that kind of governs his actions and his powers is Act 47. And Section 703B of Act 47 requires that the receiver's recovery plan, and effectively the receiver, provide for all of the following. So it uses the term vital and necessary services, which is a very important term, and it defines it both specifically as well as generally. So it defines it as, quote, basic and fundamental municipal services, including the following: police and fire, ambulance and rescue services, refuse collection and disposal, payroll and pension obligations. There's others as well that I didn't fully include in here, but these are ones that are in particular top of mind to us. It also requires the receiver to pay the lawful financial obligations of the distressed municipality and authorities. And it also, number 3, requires a timely deposit of required payments to the pension fund So basically, it's basically saying, look, you also have to make your MMO payments on time. So in terms of this, we've got to provide, the receiver's got to provide for vital and necessary services, right? So these operations, the payment of the lawful financial obligations of the city, so making sure we're paying the bills, and also specifically of those bills, calling out MMO contributions, making sure the annual payments are made. Now, Chester's problem, as we've just laid out here, is that we can't do all of that at the same time. We cannot pay for all of these obligations at the same time with our current situation. So we can't pay our retiree benefit costs, pension and retiree health care, and fund an appropriate level of vital and necessary services to residents. And for years, it's not like this just happened recently. For years, the city's overall expenses exceeded its revenues. And the only way that the city really got by was by not making its full MMO payment. And that's how the receivables came to be. And the reality is now that bill has come due. We have to make these pension and retiree healthcare payments. And again, the truth of the matter is, this isn't a situation that can be solved with small incremental measures. I mean, we've looked, and we're going to talk about some of the steps that we've taken here. The only way to really solve Chester's problems and not just put a Band-Aid on them is to take some significant comprehensive action. And so one of the things that one of the tools that a receiver has, if provided with authorization, is a very significant one. And that is to have the city file for bankruptcy. And as came out last week, the city has requested and has received authorization from the Secretary of the Department of Community and Economic Development to file for bankruptcy should the receiver decide to do so. That is one of the first steps that a receiver needs to take in order to file for bankruptcy. Under Act 47 needs the authorization from the Secretary of DCED. And the receiver has that. In fact, the receiver actually obtained this authorization in February of this year. And we continue to work to try to avoid a bankruptcy filing. The fact of the matter was, back in February, the city's situation, in our view, warranted a request here and an authorization here that was made previously. And the fact of the matter is, as we've seen and as we've talked about, the city's financial situation has only deteriorated since that time. And while the receiver, again, has authorization to file, there's nothing imminent. I'm going to be very clear about this. We're not running into court next week, filing for bankruptcy. We are continuing to try to avoid having to do so. But the true real solution here, and again, because we want to be very upfront with everybody about Chester's situation and the options that it really truly has to address the problems, is that we need to reduce retiree benefit costs, among other city expenditures, and we need a large influx of money to deposit into the pension funds and for the city's other needs as well. So I want to talk before we move on and maybe take some questions here, or also talk a little bit about options here. I wanted to spend a moment or two kind of talking about kind of what's been happening. How did we kind of get to this point? What, for those of you who may be watching this for the first time, this may be your first MFRAC meeting, you haven't necessarily tuned in until now. What's really been going on here, and what are the steps that have been taken over the last 2 years that have been addressed, that we've taken over the last 2 years while the city's been in receivership. And I really want to start here with what the Chester residents and businesses have had to endure, not just recently, but over time. I mean, one is they're dealing with high taxes and fees. The resident earned income tax for residents of the city of Chester is the second highest in Pennsylvania, at a rate of 3.75%. Most municipalities in Delaware County, your resident earned income tax rate is around 1%. In Chester, it's 3.75%. And that rate actually had to be increased in 2021 from 2.75% to 3.75% to comply with the distressed pension EIT law. So that increase that residents are paying, that's going to the pension funds. And that's a reason why we're seeing the police pension fund marginally better than where it was when we began this process of receivership. But again, nowhere near where it needs to be. And again, we're not making any progress with the receivables. Residents also have to pay a stormwater fee that is levied by the Stormwater Authority. A lot of other municipalities in Delaware County, they don't have to do that. So we haven't done a full analysis of all the fees and taxes that Chester residents have had to pay and businesses have had to pay. But they're significant. And again, the resident EIT is the second highest in the Commonwealth behind the city of Philadelphia. We've also seen certain employee pensions increased over time and pension spiking. We've had presentations about that previously. City of Chester residents dealing with illegal dumping sites that are happening in the city. The school district is also in receivership. Our fire department, our professional fire department, provides services to neighboring municipalities without commensurate financial support from these municipalities. So effectively, the Chester residents are funding fire services that are being provided to non-Chester residents. And the fire department is going to respond to these calls, but obviously that costs money. And right now, the city of Chester residents are paying for that. We have a significant capital project backlog. You can tell that from the streets and from the infrastructure projects that haven't been able to be executed. You can tell that, unfortunately, in some of the city buildings as well. We don't have any financial reserves, so we really are watching our cash basis very, very closely and needing to make sure we're taking steps so that we don't run out of money. And we're also reliant on revenue sources from host fees. And we're significantly reliant on those, both from the casino as well as in the incinerator. So, what has been already done here? If folks are wondering, okay, you're talking about bankruptcy authorization, that sounds like a really big step. What have you been doing to try and avoid that? And there's actually quite a bit that's been going on. One is, if we look at the city of Chester's headcount and just look at the number of positions, we've seen positions reduced by almost 13% in 2020 from 200. So it's about 35.5 positions reduced from 2020 to 2022. And most of that really is in the non-public safety area. In fact, I think all of it is in the non-public safety area in terms of budgeted positions. We've implemented increased healthcare contributions for non-represented employees and elected officials. There's going to be future reductions in elected official salaries. We corrected the distressed pension earned income tax for residents, which again has resulted in the second highest earned income tax in Pennsylvania. With respect to pensions and retiree healthcare, in 2021, we made the MMO payment in full for the first time since 2013. While again, we think that's good. It came as the result of significant impact operations, and I think the residents and employees have felt that. And just so folks know, the way that this works with the MMO and the receivables is that when the city makes an MMO payment now, it doesn't go to the current MMO, the 2021 MMO, if you will. It goes back to effectively back to 2014 to make that 2014 payment. It goes back to basically the first liability that the city incurred. So kind of the way we're going right now, we're never going to be able to catch up with receivables, because every payment we make goes to that first payment back in 2014, maybe 2015. So from the perspective of the receivable, we're never going to get current with our MMO absent a significant lump sum influx that's going to clear up the entire backlog. We've moved eligible retirees to a Medicare supplemental plan, so it didn't change their benefits, but we changed who would pay first, and Medicare would pay first rather than the city. We've enforced recoupment of pension amounts for police officers who retired with a disability pension but got another job. I also don't have it listed here, but we've also, from our perspective, seen what we believe to be improper benefit calculations, improper benefit increases for police officers who were hired during a certain period, not new officers, not officers hired after 2017, but officers hired prior to that, and have taken actions to address that as well. Now there's a grievance that's been filed on that matter that may be heard in a couple of months. But again, these are steps that have been taken to deal with pensions and retiree health care. In the public works area, we've consolidated streets and parks staff into one public works department that we think is going to be being run more efficiently. When we got here, and the city will remember this, we only had 2 full-time and 6 part-time staff in the public works department. We've been able to call back public works employees. We've outsourced bulk trash services. We're in the process of installing illegal dumping cameras, which hopefully will be going online this week. We've obtained operational flexibility with the Teamster contract. SCI Chester is going to be helping us with some of the public works responsibilities this year. And we also have PennDOT now plowing state roads in Chester. So again, we're trying to do our best with the resources that we can afford right now. With police and fire, some of you may be aware that with the Delaware County DA's office help, we're getting help from the state police to assist the Chester Police Department with Operation Safe Streets during May and June. We've completed a police study that has looked at police operations as well as other recommendations for improvement in the fire department through the SAFER grant. And this really was ongoing as we got here. The city's been able to hire 8 firefighters. So those are 8 additional firefighters that we have that we didn't have before. Although in this situation, same kind of thing with ARPA, those firefighters are grant funded. And that grant is going to expire in early 2024. So if we don't get a new grant, or we don't figure out how we're going to pay for that, we're going to be dealing with trying to figure out how we fund 8 firefighters in early 2024. And also with the fire department, we've also completed a fire study that and both of the police study and the fire study, those of you who haven't seen them or might be interested in them, those were previously recorded on during an MFRAC presentation, and certainly something that you can watch at your own convenience. Economic development and codes, a lot of here, there've been a lot of studies that are ongoing and frankly are about to be wrapped up. Looking at economic development strategy that will feed into the city's comprehensive plan. We are in process right now of finalizing the contract to update the city's comprehensive plan. So the vendor has been selected and in the process of getting final signatures. There's also been an assessment for the downtown Overtown neighborhood that's focused on expanding downtown businesses to include small scale manufacturing and development. We've had a diversity consultant come in that's been trying to help the city with diversity and inclusion impacts for purchasing and procurement. And Regional Property Solutions just recently completed an operations assessment on the city's codes department. So again, focusing on operational efficiencies and performance improvement in the department. And where we are in terms of where we are now and what steps have been taken, the current projects that we have in process are: number one, in the process of hiring a chief operating officer. We're in the process of a search, and hopefully, we've got some candidates that are under consideration that the receiver and the city will be talking to hopefully in the next couple of weeks. We are addressing finance department issues. So trying to get some additional help for the finance department. On council's agenda for tomorrow is a contract for a group called Protivity, who would bring in approximately 8 individuals to assist the finance department with not only kind of getting current on audits and bank reconciliations and other important financial things, but also putting us in the position to be able to kind of stabilize the department and have it be able to do the work that we need it to do. That addressing of finance department issues also includes outsourcing the payroll function. And at the moment, the city is in the process of an RFP process to come up with a vendor to outsource payroll. And hopefully we'll have one under contract in the next couple of months. And then finally, also looking to address codes issues. That's another significant impact, another significant project that feeds into economic development, feeds into the safety of the city and also the appearance of the city. And we've got groups working together on that issue as well. So let me pause here. I know that was a lot in the first part here. I'm happy to answer questions about anything we've listed here, about the bankruptcy authorization, about anything else that I've just shared here. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment, and we can go back to it once we answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kapoor. I would agree that it's been a lot of information shared through the first section of the presentation here. Opening it up to the full committee, are there any questions of Mr. Kapoor or myself?
Okay.
Mr. Kapoor, if I could, perhaps while the committee is getting some thoughts together, we are receiving several questions through the Facebook, through the public forum. Could you speak to charging for fire services? There was a question about service being provided to neighboring municipalities. Could you speak for a second about intermunicipal agreements and/or the ability of for the city of Chester to collect on some of that help there, the support?
Well, again, and so what would have to be done here is a cooperative agreement. We're not talking about sending a letter to municipalities and giving them 90 days to pay, or we cease responding. The City of Chester Fire Department is going to need to respond to these calls, assuming that it meets whatever mutual aid situation that is out there. What has to be done over here is, as you alluded to, Mr. Receiver, like an intermunicipality cooperation agreement. Where we see where neighboring municipalities see the value of the work that the Chester Fire Department does, and again, we understand they're cash strapped as well, probably certainly not in the same position we're in, but that would need to be done through an intermunicipality sort of cooperation agreement. I'll also just note too that the fire study, I think, did a nice job of providing data on how many calls the City of Chester Fire Department responded to versus how many calls other municipalities have provided mutual aid to the City of Chester. And again, I don't want to minimize that. I mean, there was a significant fire just a couple of weeks ago where a lot of departments responded in downtown Chester. So I don't want to seek to minimize that. But the reality is, when you look at that amount of calls, the City of Chester is overwhelmingly responding to calls in other jurisdictions. And so again, perhaps this may be an opportunity for the county to look at more of a kind of a regional model. And I know there's a lot going on with the county as well. I know they're trying to deal with the ambulance services right now, and we're not trying to put another item on the plate, but perhaps there's ways of thinking about this in a more regional way, because that's really the only way that this is going to be affordable, and the only way that I think is frankly going to be fair from the perspective of city residents.
Thank you for that. Circling back to the earlier comments about vital and necessary services, the 8 prescribed services in the Receiver Law, Act 47, could you perhaps try to reconcile that with the current service levels being provided by the city, and what impact, if any, a bankruptcy filing may have on those service levels? Is there a difference between the vital and necessary services that are to be provided and what the city is currently providing? Is there a difference there? And then the second part being, if there were a bankruptcy filing, what would be the impact to service levels?
Sure. So in terms, there's a lot there, and let me talk about sort of the kind of the current service levels. And again, the probably a better person to ask would be a Chester resident rather than me, and I think they could probably weigh in on how they feel about it. At the same time, I mean, I think we just listed here in the prior slides just the financial difficulties the city's facing, and really where we were in 2020. With the Public Works Department, when we had literally 2 full-time people and 6 part-time people trying to do all the work for the public works work in the city, which is just that's just not feasible to do. So if we look at the service levels, I mean, clearly we are we're looking to improve those, not only from a financial end, and that comes in things like trying to improve employee compensation so that we're able to retain and recruit people. That's a big problem we're having right now in the police department, frankly. We have positions, we are trying to hire additional people there, and Commissioner Gretzky is working to do that. And I know we've got several individuals going through the process right now. But trying to figure out kind of the best way of doing that. We need to be able to reinvest in some of the employee compensation. And one way that may happen through a bankruptcy is if you reduce the costs of the MMO, and I'm going to get to this when we talk about kind of the solutions, but I think it's worth hearing now. If we reduce the pension liabilities and the MMO costs, right, it's going to $13.5 million next year. Reduce it to something the city can actually afford. We could take some of that freed up savings that would have been going to the MMO and reinvest it in employee compensation, other service levels, other additional employees, et cetera, to get us to a position where we really think is appropriate for the city. And so, if you think of it from the bankruptcy perspective, if you file for bankruptcy, does that mean you lay off everybody? The answer is no. That's not what happens. You've got, this is a city. It's not a a business, right? So we theoretically can't pick up and move away. The city is still here, and so in terms of what kind of our options would be over there with respect to a bankruptcy is trying to figure out how we are able to again provide an appropriate level of services, address the retiree healthcare and pension costs, and do it really in a comprehensive way. Because again, if we look at it, if you go back to previous slides, like things have happened here, right? Headcount has been reduced by 33.5 people since 2020. That's over the last 2 years. It's been a 13% reduction. And so we will still need police officers. We will still need firefighters. We will still need public works employees. We will still need codes officers. The work of the city will still need to continue. The question with respect to bankruptcy is, how do we restructure our finances in such a way that Chester's problems are truly fixed, so that like going forward, we're able to do this in a way that's not worrying about running out of money every year, because that's not the way to run a city. That doesn't give your employees a lot of confidence of either joining the city or leaving. And so, we've been in state oversight for 27 years. The desire here is really to try and address these situations truly and head on, so that the residents and all of us are on the same page as to what level of services we can truly afford and what we can provide.
Thank you for dealing or answering my questions in a bit of a sidetrack. If you'd like to continue on.
Sure. So let me jump here. Again, I apologize. We've still been talking about problems. Let's talk about possible solutions here. And again, is the presentation up?
Yes.
Great. All right. So let's move on to the next part of the presentation, which is really focused on monetization options here. And look, and if you're wondering, well, why are we talking about monetization? Aren't there 50 other things you can do? and are doing, the answer is yes. There are other things that we can be doing and that we are doing and that we would be happy to talk about. But at the end of the day, there is no reasonable way that Chester is going to remain financially viable without, one, reducing its pension and retiree healthcare costs, and two, depositing a significant amount of money into those underfunded pension plans. We just have to be very blunt about it. I think in the prior slides, we've been clear about that. $36.6 million in receivables, a police pension fund with the equivalent of 8 months of benefits in it, an MMO that's going up by $3 million next year that we can't pay for, and a budget that's balanced only because of federal one-time help. And truly the only realistic way for Chester to be able to deposit that amount of money that it needs in its pension funds to have an affordable pension payment is to monetize the Chester Water Authority. There's no other reasonable way, in our view, that we really fix the problems without a monetization. So let's sort of ask the question, all right, what would a monetization do for Chester? And again, when I talk about monetization, I'm not talking about purely privatization. We're going to get in a moment to talk about perhaps a concept, keeping it in public hands of what we might be able to do. But when I talk about monetization, I'm talking about a money coming from either the sale of or the lease of or settlements from the Chester Water Authority. And it would have two significant impacts that kind of feed on each other and help the city not only immediately, but also going forward. First, and probably most obvious, is that it'll ensure that current and future retirees would continue to receive a pension. So, right now, again, I talked about the police pension fund having the equivalent of 8 months of pension payments left in it. Putting a large amount of money in there that would fully fund the plan obviously would take it from being very, very poorly funded to being financially secure, which I think everybody wants there. So you have that. The other thing that, again, I alluded to earlier, but I think bears repeating, is that the better a plan is funded, the lower the city's annual MMO or annual pension contribution is. So right now, the reason why the pension contribution is going up as high as it's going up, is because the plans are so poorly funded. And remember, that MMO right now still assumes that 36.6 million in receivables is in there. But even assuming it's in there, these plans are still very, very poorly funded. And that's why the MMO is going up as high as it has. So if we deposit a significant amount of money into these pension plans, what that does is that lowers the MMO. So if we can minimize the MMO, what that does is the money that the city of Chester is paying right now to its pension MMO, or that we paid in 2021, we can now divert that elsewhere. We can reinvest in other places that are really important, services, developing a fund balance reserve, capital projects, a variety of, potentially minimizing, or rolling back some of the high taxes and fees that residents have to pay. There's a variety of other areas that we could certainly use that money to do, because right now so much of it is being taken up through retiree benefits, and that's pensions and retiree healthcare. So there's basically three possible paths that we see here, and we're going to talk a little bit high level, but we also want to kind of clue both the committee as well as the public into our thought process right now, because we're sitting here as the receivers team trying to figure out a way out of this, right? And trying to figure out what are our realistic options that we have. If we're saying right now that the only way we're remaining financially viable as a city is if we reduce our retiree benefit costs and we get a large lump sum into the city, what does that truly look like, again, in reality? And there's three possible paths here. And they have different impacts, and they have sort of different pros and cons to them. The first one, which we'll talk about in a moment, which from our perspective is the worst of all situations, is no water system monetization. And we'll talk about in a moment what that would mean for the city and in our situation. Second option, second path, is you seek to sell the system to a private company. So privatization here. And we'll talk about that. And I know we have talked about that before, and that's been on a lot of people's minds. It's generated a lot of interest in the area. We know we're going to talk about that in a moment, the pros and cons of that. The third path is to monetize the system, but to keep it in public hands. So is there a way, is there a concept that the city of Chester's needs could be met through a monetization that would also keep the system in public hands? And so we're going to talk about each one of those and talk about kind of the pros and cons and the impacts, at least from our perspective, of what we see about these different routes. But again, I want to be clear here, and I'm going to repeat myself quite a bit. Every one of these paths that we're talking about here starts with the premise that the city can't afford its pension and retiree healthcare costs, and they have to be restructured. It'll do us no good to put in a lot of money into these plans and with an unsustainable level of benefits. And then several years later, we'll find ourselves back in the situation where we've got underfunded plans, where we're not able to make these payments. And if we do that, we're right back in the same situation we started with, and we don't have a water system to monetize. Unfortunately, that's happened with other Pennsylvania municipalities, and that's not something that we want to do here in Chester. If we're going to go through this process, which is as difficult as it is, we want to make sure that we do our best to truly, truly fix the problem and not just paper over it. But the severity of that, so if I'm saying, look, we've got to adjust these, the severity depends on how much money the city can place in the pension funds, right? If we don't put much in there, you've got to get the rest from cuts. If you can put more in there, then there's less that you need to do in the restructuring of retiree healthcare and pensions. And here I'm talking about, I want to be clear about this, I'm talking about existing people who are collecting pensions and existing people who are in retiree healthcare. I'm not talking about this for the future. Frankly, for city employees who were hired after 2017, most of these employees, particularly in police and fire, don't have retiree healthcare. And they've got a pension that's the minimum under the third-class city code. So what we're really talking about here is existing employees and also existing retirees. So let's talk about what I'm kind of referring to as the worst case scenario, which is the no monetization path. If we go down this route and basically say, look, we're not going to be able to monetize the water system, we're not going to be able to get money out of it, then here's our situation. We have no realistic way of paying for pensions. There's no realistic way of paying that 36.6 million in receivables. There's no way we have capital needs, get our capital needs met, and there's no way we're able to pay for other important financial needs such as reserves. So we completely put that aside. Our MMOs are going to continue to increase, and what that's going to do, just like we're seeing in 2023, that's going to crowd out our funding for vital operations. So effectively, if we look at the next bullet, and this is the reality we're facing right now, this isn't hypothetical, this isn't a what if scenario, this is a situation and a question that we need to answer right in our next budget cycle and need to be thinking about right now is, frankly, next year, our choice is going to be, do we make the MMO payments or do we fund operations? Because our MMO payments going up by $3 million. Again, that's assuming that $36.6 million has already been paid into it. And that's going to have, again, if we don't basically say we're not paying the MMOs, that's going to have a significant and immediate impact to city operations. And remember, when we're talking about our pension plan right now, our police pension plan, and why I said the bills come due is effectively the police pension plan has been shorted over the last 8 years. And so we don't have the ability to do that anymore, even if we wanted to. It has the equivalent of 8 months of benefits in there. And if we don't make those payments and put the money in there, that plan's going to run out of money. And we're going to be in a situation where we're both not going to be able to fund operations, but also have a, have a bankrupt pension plan. And the reality of this too, if we're not able to get this, our only option then is cuts in a bankruptcy context. And and I should be clear here, it's not just for pensioners and retiree health folks who are getting retiree health care, but it would be kind of across the board. It would be looking at other creditors as well. But again, the mathematical reality of this is we would need to seek to severely cut pensions and retiree health care benefits in bankruptcy. We are we are working very hard to avoid this path. I hesitate to even call it a path, but it is a possibility. And in our mind, this is the worst case scenario. Second option here, a privatization of the water system path. First, in terms of kind of what the impacts of this would be, this would fund pensions and other city financial needs. Given the bids that we've received from Aqua and the bids the city's received from PA American, netting out the debt that they would need to pay from the CWA, the city would stand to receive several $100 million from a privatization path, and that would address the pensions, that would address other city financial needs. Now, the other impact this would have, as folks have pointed out, is that it would raise water rates on ratepayers, but also on residents. The receiver and his team are very cognizant of fees and taxes that residents are being asked to pay. And as I said earlier, they're already paying very high taxes and fees. And so this would, even if it didn't happen immediately, over time, let's be honest, and I think everybody will be forthright about this, water rates are going to rise. Frankly, they would also rise in the public option, if you will, that I'll talk about in a moment, but they would rise here as well. The water system would be in private hands. There's some out there who have concerns about that, and clearly we've heard about that. There's also significant litigation risk here of being able to actually pull this off, of actually being able to effectuate it, of actually being able to get the money in. Because for us, it does us no good to say we have the right to do this without actually having the money in there. We need the money to be very, very blunt about it. And again, we'll talk about it in a moment, because the court decision right now is uncertain, because this matters in front of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court right now. We would still be in a position where we would need to seek to significantly reduce pension and retiree healthcare benefit liabilities in a bankruptcy process, because if the city loses at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, we're back in the no monetization situation. We're back in this path where we don't want to be. But again, that's something that we have to weigh, and that's a reality. Now, the way I kind of describe this in my mind here is, the no monetization is the worst case scenario. This privatization path, from what I'm kind of calling this, is the high risk, high reward, if you will, and both for the city and for CWA, right? Because if the city wins and is also successful in any other underlying litigation, it gets a significant amount of money, right? It gets probably the most amount of money it could possibly get from the system, from selling the system through this path. And CWA loses, right? Because it would eventually be privatized and go away from the current CWA perspective. On the flip side is, if CWA wins at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, well, that's high reward for them, right? Because the city wouldn't be able to repossess the assets and privatize the system if it desired. So that's the high reward for CWA. The high risk for the city, right, is that they lose at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So, so that's something we have to be cognizant about, because we don't know the answer. We don't know what the court is going to do. And that, again, remains in litigation. And the city won at the Commonwealth Court level. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court recently agreed to hear the case. Initially, the briefs for the Chester Water Authority were due yesterday, but the court gave CWA an extension to June 22nd to file its briefs. The responses from the city are going to be due 30 days after those briefs are filed. There's likely going to be oral argument sometime in the fall, but the punchline of all this is we're not going to get a decision in this case to occur probably until sometime next year. And even after that decision, we expect there's other underlying litigation that would continue. So again, this is the reality that we're facing here, and this is what's in our mind as we're trying to figure out what are the next steps. So let's talk about the third path, and this is to keep it in public hands path. So earlier, I guess, well, in September of 2021, the receiver stated in a public statement, and has reaffirmed since, that he was open to keeping the system in public hands if the city could receive a fair price for the system. We're not wedded to a privatization option. We're not, wedded to a public path as well. The goal of the receiver, as we've seen earlier, his mission is to provide vital and necessary services, and to be able to make sure the city's making its payments and that it's able to pay its pensions. And so he also said during that time that he was directing his team, us, to do our due diligence to see if we could come up with a scenario where the city could receive a fair price, and in the same time the CWA stays in public hands. And so since that time, we've been looking at other options. We've been trying to research, trying to think about other ideas, and we're bringing a potential concept here to MFRAC for some discussion. It's still at a high level area. I want to be clear about that. We're not putting any numbers down here, but we want to talk about kind of a concept that could potentially, if the numbers work out and the structure works out, keep it in public hands. And so, what this would do, if we'll talk about the concept in a moment, is it would address the city's pension and other financial needs, but it would also seek to minimize the impact on water system ratepayers. And that includes city residents. And again, from the perspective of the receiver, to be very clear here, ratepayers are residents. And so if those go up significantly, there'll be a lot of people who may not be able to make their water payments. And that's not we've seen what the residents have already had to endure. And we want to minimize any other additional taxes or fees that they would need to pay. Again, we would still need to restructure benefit costs, but again, the impact would be lessened. And so here's the concept, and here's what we're looking at, and here's kind of how we would see that this may work. In our mind, there's really two parts to this. One is a significant upfront lump sum payment that is sufficient to, be deposited into the pension funds so that we can get an affordable MMO amount. And the other thing is for that lump sum payment, significant lump sum payment upfront, to address the city's other financial needs. So that includes, but not limited to, capital projects and establishing appropriate reserves. And again, as I said before, if we do this, we'll be able to lower the MMO, and we'll be able to reinvest that in other areas. The second part of this, and again, these are two parts. So first part's a significant upfront lump sum. The second part here is a smaller ongoing annual payment that would allow the city not to have to be financially reliant on host fees from third parties. So for example, from the incinerator. So if we're able to structure this or able to do this, you may be in a situation with an ongoing payment, again, that would be lower, that would not require the city to have to be financially reliant on the Covanta host fees or the casino host fees. And so that obviously would be helpful for the city, because if either one of those goes away at some point, again, we're going to be right back in the same financial situation that the city is in right now. So the idea here would be the system would stay in CWA's hands here. We're talking about it remaining in CWA's hands, and it would basically be up to the CWA to decide how to fund these payments. Would it be in the process of rates? Would it be in the process of going out for debt? We're not sitting here and prescribing one way of doing this, but the idea would be that it would remain in CWA's hands. And clearly here, and I know I'm sort of stating the obvious, I realize that when I'm saying this is that the impact, whether it's on rates or how much needs to go in here, depends on how much these payments would be and how they would be structured, right? So if you had a significant large lump sum payment up front, that would obviously put the most pressure on the CWA to have to come up with the money immediately, and that would have an impact certainly on rates. But again, we're not privy to the CWA's finances. We don't have a model or a rate model that could tell us what we put in and plug these things in and what impact that has on the rates. And that would be obviously helpful to do, and something that would need to be considered if this path is pursued. So the benefits of this and kind of the pros of this, if you will, and if this were done correctly. So here's what might be able to be done here. One is we could address the retiree benefit cost issues, and we can allow the city to reinvest in critical areas, such as active employee compensation. This, like the privatization idea, would minimize cuts to retiree pensions and retiree healthcare. This would also keep the water system in public hands. And again, depending upon how it is structured, minimize the rate increases to ratepayers. In this case, at least in terms of figuring out the rate here, there's not a profit consideration here in the CWA as you would in the privatization end. So that would obviously at some point have an impact on the rates. So again, depending upon, at the same time, I'm sure the PA American and Aqua would say, well, we would be able to spread it over a larger rate base, and I'm sure that would be the response to what I'm putting out here. But eventually, in that case, you're going to be, residents are going to see their rates go up in both scenarios. The other thing, again, if done correctly, that I know for some individuals out here who are concerned about the city's reliance on host fees, it would free the city from having to be financially reliant on third-party host fees, such as those from the incinerator. And finally, here, in terms of the litigation risk, it would avoid having the Pennsylvania Supreme Court have to make a decision in the litigation. And again, as I said earlier, this is the privatization path is the high risk, high reward. There's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser in that case. It really is one or the other there. And so if you're able to come to an agreement without having the Pennsylvania Supreme Court make a decision, that reduces the risk, right, for the city and for CWA. So just in a conclusion here, and again, I'll open this up to questions here in a moment. We really have, in Chester's case, a once in a generation opportunity to truly address all of the issues that have kept this city in financial oversight for the last 27 years. And even with all the challenges, even with all the difficulties that Chester has right now, we really do see a path forward for the city, but it's only going to work, and we're only going to succeed if we do what really needs to be done. And that's taking some pretty significant, some pretty bold, some pretty comprehensive steps in order to address the situation. Because again, I know the receiver is here and he can certainly speak for himself, but we're committed to actually trying to solve these problems, not simply put a Band-Aid on them. We don't want to put this on to the next generation. We want the retirees, if they're going to be asked to restructure their pensions or retiree health care, that we can look them in the eye and say that to the best of our ability, we don't believe that you're going to have to do this again. We want to do this once, and we want to do this right, and we don't want to ever have to have us come back here or any other receiver have to come back here in the future. But we've got limited options here, and again, what you see here is kind of our thought process and how we see the situation. So I'll pause here for the committee, the receiver, to ask any questions if you so choose.
Thank you again, Mr. Kapoor, opening it up to the full committee for questions.
Were there any from the public on the stream?
There are actually, Dr. Bracy just came off mute.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Receiver, I just have one question. I guess the public option, for former elected officials, current elected officials, city residents, always seems like the right way to go. And the way that plan was just laid out, that was the last part of your options there, Mr. Kapoor. What's the roadblock stopping that from going forward? It seems like a doable plan that would, sort of be, I hate to sound trite, but a win-win for all involved.
So to answer the question, so number one is, Director Bracy, thank you for that question. And let me say this, I think for many folks, this is the first time they've been seeing this. So we have not yet sort of tested in any strength, in any reasonable way, what that looks like. I think if I'm sitting in CWA shoes, what I would respond with is, one is you haven't given me a number yet, so I don't know if this is feasible or not. And that's fair, right? That's on us to develop and come up with. I mean, I will say in the last presentation, in the May 10th presentation, to fully fund the pension plans, our actuary calculated in a lump sum amount of $128 million. So, if you want to start that as and again, that doesn't include all the other things that we need as well, right? But if you're kind of looking at order of magnitude, that's kind of where we are. And I think, part of it has been that we haven't sort of discussed, I think, the nuts and bolts of it. The other thing is this has been in litigation, right? So there's a question of, do I have, from the CWA's end do I have to pay anything, right? And that's frankly still up in the air, right? The Pennsylvania Supreme Court still hasn't done it, but this is the risk and reward. And I think the other thing too here is on our end also trying to figure out kind of what impact this would have on rates, because we can throw out whatever number we want out there, but if we're not able to fully translate it to like what this would actually impact on rates, there's going to be a lot of people out there who are going to be kind of concerned and wondering kind of what does this really mean to me, right? And what does it mean to the retirees? And so at this point, there may be other roadblocks out there. I mean, I'm sure there are, but we wanted to bring this concept at least as an idea for a possible path forward, and at least kind of starting the contours with something that maybe a conversation starter for a potential path.
Thank you. And is that a conversation starter from the receiver's office, the mayor's office?
I think that's all
CWA?
involved. Yeah, and I think that's all involved. I mean, I think this is, like I said, I mean, again, in defense of the city, this is something that we ran by the city last week for the first time, and it's taken a while for us to kind of marinate this. So again, I fully understand why you haven't heard anything from the city on this, because frankly they found out about a week ago about this concept that we were throwing about, and many others are finding out about it, or at least hearing about it now for the first time.
Thank you. From my vantage point, it sounds like something worth exploration, but we know the details are yet to be determined, but thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Kapoor,
Yes, sir.
if I may. The concept that you were just now describing, we were in conversations prior to receivership. The city was in conversations with Chester Water Authority, talking about that very concept. There was a number put forth by the Water Authority, but it came with the number of years. I forget the amount of years. I have to look at the contract again, or the concept again. But we have been in conversation in past times with Water Authority officials discussing that same type of concept, just for record.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there and thank you, Director Bracy. Is there anyone else from the committee that has questions for Mr. Kapoor at this time? All right, deferring to a couple questions we received from the public side. Mayor Kirkland just alluded to previous conversations, and just a general question of what, if any, conversations are currently going on with the CWA. Mr. Kapoor, would you mind responding to that part?
Sure, and again, I mean, I think we have over the past several months had some initial conversations with the CWA. We haven't had anything scheduled recently, but my expectation is that we'll start to have some conversations probably pretty soon about this. Nothing is scheduled here, but Certainly, we're open to exploring it. I think the mayor makes a great point here. If it's not going to work, then like we kind of want to know about it, right? We want to know about it sooner rather than later, and we need to make the decision based on that. I think, right now, to be honest with you, there was a lot of litigation going on. This is now in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. It is where it is. This is as good a time, I think, of any to start to sit down and have the conversation. And honestly, not just with the CWA, but also with other parties as well. One of the things that happens as part of a bankruptcy process that is kind of recommended as part of a Chapter 9 filing is sitting down with, referred to as creditors, and trying to work something out before you have to file, and seeing if you can do that. And we'd like to be able to do that. I mean, our desire is to try to avoid a filing. We may not be able to, but we want to avoid it. And even if we have to, we want to be able to do this in a way that, again, takes care of this, fixes the city's problems. Let me put it that way. But to the extent we can minimize impacts on retirees, on employees, on residents, we of course want to do that. And this is the best way probably of doing that.
Thank you for that. And just like 2 weeks ago, I had to ask, what about Del Coro?
Okay, so no update on that. We have the question here is again whether the city is entitled to any compensation or any money from the reversion of assets of what had been city assets in the event that Del Coro is sold. And so that matter is before the PUC. Our attorneys have already submitted a letter to the PUC indicating their desire to put the PUC on notice that like other municipalities who have done so, we want to get in line. And again, the benefit of that is, look, the more money we could get through various options such as that, the less money we need from other places. So that's how we view that. We want to pursue every option we can, and that includes the possibility of money from the Del Coro sale.
Question. Mr. Kapoor, can you provide some insight on another area, location, municipality where an authority was monetized for the municipality, and how they were able to use their funds, or where they were positioned their funds for monetization? Sure.
Yeah. So the one I'm most familiar with is the city of Allentown. Well, actually two: the city of Allentown and the city of Scranton. In both of those situations, well, the city of Scranton was in an Act 47 context. I believe it was their sewer authority, their sewer assets that they monetized, and they placed those monies into the pension plans. There were also some prior to that money going in there, though, there were some agreements with the unions as to kind of restructuring some of the pensions. I don't recall whether that impacted existing retirees. I'm not sure if it did. I know it impacted, new retirees, if you will. But that's one scenario. The city of Allentown is it's very similar. They went through a process. The Lehigh Authority purchased it, so that was a public entity, if you will. And what they did was put a significant amount of money in their pension plans. One area, and I don't mean to pick on them, but City of Coatesville used a lot of their assets or monetizations to fund operating, which again, unfortunately, what that means is if you use that to sort of plug your gap, kind of like what we're doing with ARPA, at the end of the period, you run out of cash. You're back to the same spot you were before. So again, I don't need to point fingers over here, but there's a couple sort of different ways of doing it. The ones we would recommend is you address your financial liabilities in a way that's immediate and has a material impact. going forward on your budget.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, Mr. Kapoor, if I could just try to recap before we press forward, and I want to respond to the last question, or our last question just for this segment about what is the worst case scenario. I think here we understand that many residents would like to keep the authority in public hands. We also understand that many residents do not want to remain financially reliant on the approximately $5 million or so in annual host fees from the Covanta incinerator. And obviously the city retirees and employees want to minimize any cuts to their pensions and retiree healthcare benefits. So this concept, this third option, if you will, would keep the water system in public hands, minimize cuts to retirees from pension and healthcare benefits, and eliminate the city's reliance on host fee payments from the incinerator, while water rates would increase, as would be the case if the system were privatized. They may not rise as high if the water system were privatized. So the rate increase would depend on the overall amount and structure of any agreement, of course. But worst case scenario, I think it sounds like if we cannot reach an agreement with the Chester Water Authority's board, then we would be stuck with no other option but to seek privatization. I mean, we can't go with an all or nothing scenario going into court and risk it all. So if no other option but to seek significant changes in bankruptcy and attempt to sell the water system to either Aqua or PA American. But this would be risky and painful process for everyone involved. So did that capture the concept and also the worst case scenario?
Yes, and truly, even in the worst case scenario, we don't, no city has gotten to that point in Pennsylvania, right? Is that disincorporation? I mean, what is that? Because at some point you just run out. You just run out of cash, or you cut it to a level. That's so. Again, we're not. So, Mr. Receiver, yes, I think that's an accurate summary of what I've laid out here. But even in the no monetization scenario, I don't think we've laid out what could potentially could happen, because it never has gone that far.
Makes sense. Thank you for that. If nothing else from the committee, I think we could continue on.
Okay. Very good. All right. Let me share this, and let me move on now to an area and an item I know that we've spent a lot of time on, and to talk about this, talk about the parking contract. And what we're looking to do here is really get some input from the MFRAC committee on possible further actions regarding the parking contract, including whether or not to terminate the contract. So, we've discussed this at pretty much at length at the December 28th, 2021 MFRAC, the January 11th, 2022 MFRAC, the February 8th, 2022 MFRAC. And also, as part of those consultations, the receiver consulted with the committee about whether to modify the agreement to remove the liquidated damages penalty. And the receiver did that on February 4th of 2022. And so again, we're looking at the options. We're continuing to try and understand kind of the contract itself, if you will, and also to consider options. So, we've already gone for an hour and 20 minutes, and I really want to kind of continue to move through this. So given time constraints, we're not looking to repeat what we talked about in previous presentations. But if the committee has any questions, or the public has any questions about any of the issues we raised in those presentations, we'll be happy to talk about them. But there's nothing that's come to light since those presentations that has caused us to feel that we need to revisit any facts that we've already presented. What we're going to do today, though, is present with you new information from our end about some of our concerns that we have regarding how this contract appeared to come to be. And really here, trying to understand kind of like how the contract was procured, how it got set up, and in particular here, where and we'll list this out. We'll kind of go through it. Is in some documents, some of the documents that we reviewed, it was represented that the contract came as a result of a competitive bidding process. So kind of went through like an RFP process. But other documents and other information that we've reviewed raise questions about whether that actually occurred. So we want to kind of take you through that information, kind of provide again, you like what we're seeing, kind of, our thoughts on this. Because again, I mean, I think this goes to the question of what, what are the receiver's options here, and what should the receiver do kind of going forward with this contract. So starting on slide 35, just starting with how the process appeared to begin, we have minutes from the June 28th City Council meeting where a resolution is approved 4-0 that authorized requests for proposals, RFPs, for the advertisement of a parking meter management services contract. And so that authorized the city clerk to advertise for an RFP. And that's usually what happens when an RFP starts. The city council authorizes it and authorizes advertising. June 28th of 2017. So in terms of a timeline that we've been able to put together, on June 28th, that resolution is passed. On July 24th, PFS, so the parking vendor, appeared to submit a bid, and that we'll show in a few minutes. Then on September 13th, this is where things start to get confusing for us, and we start to again try and reconcile what happened. On September 13th, we have city council minutes from this meeting. Chester City Council approves a resolution 5-0, noting that the RFP was not properly advertised. So the parking management RFP was not properly advertised, that the bids were to be returned unopened, and it that reauthorized the advertisement of an RFP, quote, in accordance with the advertising requirements of the city home rule charter and the third-class city code. So we'll go through those minutes in a moment, but we've not found any evidence that the RFP was re-advertised. So we don't have any evidence here that we don't know if it was advertised on June 28th. After that, we don't have any evidence that it was advertised after September 13th. Then on September 20th, which was a week later, there's a letter from the mayor to GATSO PFS informing them that they had been awarded the parking contract. So on the 13th, it says that the bids were to be returned unopened, they were rejected. And then on the 20th, there's a letter saying that they've been awarded the parking contract. So so obviously, the threshold question here is, you've got a September 13th, 2017 council resolution saying that all bids were rejected and that they were to be returned unopened. But on September 20th, PFS gets a letter saying that PFS, whose bid was dated July 24th of 2017, gets a letter saying that they're being awarded the contract. So the kind of threshold question here is if all the bids were rejected and were to be returned unopened on based on the September 13th resolution, how could a bid be awarded to a company whose RFP response was dated July 24th of 2017? And so the other threshold question here is, did other companies bid on the RFP? So to try and get a better understanding of what occurred, we looked for information that addressed the bidding process. And we found it in a couple of documents that we're going to go through here, kind of high level today. One was a discovery request that was dated February 21st of 2019 from the PFS and city attorneys to Widener in that litigation that addressed questions about the bidding process. There's a transcript from the January 9th, 2019 court hearing before Judge Dozier regarding Widener's request for an injunction, basically saying, don't put meters on our campus. There is a brief, so a court filing that was filed by the PFS and city attorneys that was dated December 15th, 2019. And then we've got council minutes and resolutions that are dated June 28th, 2017, September 13th, 2017, and October 10th of 2018. So in addition to this, I want to be clear, we didn't just kind of rely on the documents. Like, we also tried to get additional information. And so we reached out, the receiver's attorney reached out to the city solicitor via email on May 9th, and again followed up on May 13th in a pretty detailed email, kind of asking for additional information and kind of explaining what we're going to go through today, frankly, and why we're trying to understand it. And asking for this information, obviously, prior to the MFRAC meeting. So on May 20th, the city solicitor responded that he was looking for the information requested and had not found anything responsive in the solicitor's office and in the file. So again, what we're working off of is these documents. So let's start with the discovery request. And again, those of you who may be following this know that once Widener found out about the potential for having parking meters on their campus, they went into Delaware County Court of Common Pleas and basically tried to file for an injunction. And so as part of that, there was discovery that was taken. Discovery is when both sides in a court matter ask questions of each other and try and get documents from each other. So what Widener did in that initial discovery was they asked for information from documents from PFS and the city regarding the bidding process. And so the PFS and city's attorneys, and it was represented by the same firm at the time, it was Greenberg Traurig, answered by saying there was a competitive bidding process, and or there was advertising for the contract, and they provided the following documents. So this was given, there was a request for proposals document, there was the GATSO bid, and there was the September 20th, 2017 award letter to GATSO saying that they had won the contract. And so if we go through this, on slide 42, again, these are these are sort of screenshots of the discovery response. You'll see some of these. We have the source documents. Happy to provide those. Though it's probably hard to see here. But let's start with the RFP document itself. So we looked at the RFP document that PFS's attorneys attached to the discovery request. And if you look at it, it's got some pretty significant deficiencies to it. One is it doesn't at least appear to us to be a final document. There's no RFP number. The address for the purchasing department, that is like where you return the bids, is left blank, and you don't have a contact provided, which is typically what you see in an RFP. The document also says that it will award the contract within 30 days of the submission deadline. And the submission deadline on it was July 28th of 2017. And excuse me, obviously it wasn't awarded. The city didn't award that contract within 30 days of the submission, at least not that we're aware of. The other thing that it doesn't have is it does not list a specific date and place for the bids to be open, which is typically something that needs to be part of an RFP document. And I want to be clear, like this isn't, I'm not looking at this from a legal end completely. There may be other issues with this, but these are some of the ones that just kind of stick out at you. And again, this is just another page of the RFP document. You've got here the purchasing agent, and again, it doesn't list who it is, and there's nothing in the RFP that lists a specific date and place for the bids to be opened. So for a moment, though, if we put aside that RFP and say, look, let's assume for a moment the RFP document was fine, and there weren't any deficiencies with it, it was fine. On September 13th of 2017, City Council appeared to reject all the bids via resolution and directed that all the bids be returned unopened and reauthorized an advertisement of this contract or of this RFP in accordance with the City Home Rule Charter and third-class city code. And so, this is a screenshot of the resolution. That resolution also stated that the RFP authorized by council in June of 2017 had not been advertised in a newspaper of general circulation. So basically saying when the RFP was done, again, if we're interpreting this correctly, when the RFP was done in the one that was authorized back in June, it wasn't advertised, basically it wasn't advertised properly. And so this is the resolution, it was passed, signed, and these are the council minutes on slide 46 from the September 13th council meeting. Now this resolution and this information here on September 13th, in reviewing all the different filings that all the parties have made in this matter, we never saw this issue come up. We never saw kind of what happened here on September 13th be raised. And so again, it's one thing that's kind of, at least for us is puzzling here, because let's move now to the discovery response and the PFS's bid. So PFS in its discovery response said they attached their bid that was dated July 24th of 2017. So they claim that's to be a bid that they submitted on July 24th of 2017. But I go back here again and ask the question, well, if all the bids were rejected and returned unopened after that September 13th, 2017 council resolution, like how is this, which is an apparent bid that's dated July 24th, evidence for a competitive bidding process? Because if you read the resolution, and again, if we're lining this up correctly, this bid never should have been opened. It should have been sent back as a result of the September 13th, 2017 council action. And on top of that, how can this bid serve as the basis to be awarded a contract, since all the bids, including this one, should have all been rejected? Because that's what the resolution said. The resolution said all the bids were rejected and were to be returned unopened. So if it were rejected, it's basically thrown out, as would be any other bids. And again, we don't know if any other entity bid on it. And again, as part of PFS's bid dated July 24th, 2017, so this is part of the same bid document, they have a cover letter. And this is a cover letter from the GATSO USA president to the selection committee. And again, this was part of the document that was submitted in discovery. It's dated July 24th. It's saying, "Dear selection committee." So that's clearly something that's an RFP. We're pleased to offer a response to the city of Chester for management services in support of the city's parking system. So again, this is, they're talking about a response, right? So a response is something where the city would have gone out. And again, based on this information, this looks to me to be kind of coming from the from an initial RFP. But then what we see, like a week later, on September 20th of 2017, there's a letter sent to GATSO from the city awarding the pilot program for a parking management solutions contract to you. That's the quote. It's actually to the same individual. So this is to Andrew Noble, who's the president of GATSO USA. This is also to Andrew Noble. So it's to the same individual. But the letter says that the award is subject to Chester City Council approval on September 27th of 2017. And we've asked for any information related to that meeting or that purported council approval, but nothing's been provided. So we don't know if it was approved over there. We don't know if it wasn't approved over there. So again, just to kind of like summarize this a little bit, how could they be awarded anything or notified they were awarded anything when a week earlier the council unanimously rejected all the bids, said they had to be returned unopened, and reauthorized advertising? And so if there was no RFP process, or if the RFP process was defective because it wasn't advertised properly, what's the legal basis for PFS being awarded the contract? How can they say, yeah, this contract is properly awarded to us? That again, something we're trying to, something we asked the solicitor, and something again, we'll be happy to get that information, but we haven't gotten it prior to this meeting. So council did approve a contract. And so despite that award letter saying that it was subject to approval on September 27th, the only document we have that has council approving entering into a contract is a resolution that was passed on October 10th of 2018. So that was over a year later, and I apologize, the font, it's kind of shady over here. The attach or the screenshot over here, what it says is the council of the city of Chester does resolve that it does hereby approve entering into a parking management agreement with PFS 7 for phase 1 of the parking contract. Further, the city does waive the permit fees to install the parking signs within the city of Chester. Further, that the mayor and city clerk are hereby authorized to execute said agreement for and on behalf of the city of Chester. We hereby certify that this resolution passed council this 10th day of October, AD 2018, signed by the mayor, attested by the city clerk. So again, let's just kind of take a breath here, look at these documents, and then we're going to move on to the next piece of information that we looked at. So here's the summary that, if true, was provided in this discovery request. June 28th, 2017, City Council authorized the advertising for an RFP for parking services. Gatso or PFS appears to have responded with a bid on July 24th, 2017. September 13th, 2017, before the contract was awarded, council rejects all the bids, directed that the bids would be returned unopened, and reauthorized a new advertisement process. Then a week later, PFS is notified that the city is awarding them the contract. So again, how can you both respond to an RFP and have all bids returned unopened? How can a bid response be awarded if all the bids for that same RFP were rejected? So let's go to the transcript from the January 9th, 2019 court hearing. So obviously, as I said before, soon after learning about the parking contract, Widener sued for an injunction in the Delaware County Court of Common Pleas. The matter was assigned to Judge Dozier, and he held a hearing on the matter on January 9th of 2019. Various people testified, the mayor did as well. During the hearing, so we have the transcript from that hearing, and again, we're happy to provide it, but we've got some screenshots from it, and again, I know it's probably hard to see, but during the hearing, Judge Dozier asked questions about whether there was a public process or an RFP. So you could, as you read the transcript, he's asking about this and trying to kind of figure out whether there was a public process, whether there was an RFP. The counsel for PFS in the city, again, the same attorney, said that he didn't know. So here's the transcript. The court, quote, "And the selection of the vendor, I'm assuming that was done in a public process. Was there a request for, was there?" Counsel for PFS in the city responds, "I honestly don't know, Your Honor." The court, "A bidding requirement, was there RFP prepared? Were there other proposals?" And there wasn't kind of an answer to that. They kind of moved on in the conversation from there. Mayor also testified during that contract process. And so this is an excerpt from the cross-examination. The Widener attorney is cross-examining the mayor and asking, again, regarding the whether or not there was an RFP. So the Widener attorney asks, quote, "You heard the judge ask your counsel whether there was a request for proposals process for companies such as Pango. Was there?" Mayor, quote, "What we did in our process was we sat with a number of companies that have managed various parking authorities throughout the Commonwealth." Widener attorney, "I'm sorry, did you or counsel issue requests for proposals to companies such as Pango for the services Pango is going to provide to the city?" Mayor, we have had meetings. We've had meeting with all of them, different entities. This is the court. So same hearing, same kind of context. The court starts asking questions. Court, did you prepare was there a prepare maybe by your engineer or by your solicitor? No. A request for formal proposals? No. Mayor, no. Court, okay, did you advertise bids or anything of that nature? Mayor, we had not advertised bids, no. So in terms of kind of looking at this piece, which frankly actually happened before the discovery request occurred. This happened on January 9th. At that injunction hearing, counsel for PFS in the city said that he didn't know whether an RFP process occurred. And the mayor testified that there was not a formal request for proposals and the city did not advertise for bids. But that again appears to be in conflict with the February 21st, 2019 response to Widener's discovery request, where the response essentially denied that there was no competitive bidding and or advertising for the contract with PFS LLC and the city of Chester. So it seems that this kind of, again, it appears to be in conflict with what we just went through earlier in PFS's response. So the final document that we have that we wanted to look at is this document is a brief, so a court filing dated December 15th of 2019, filed by the PFS and city attorneys in response to a January 9th, 2019 order by Judge Dozier. So that January 9th, 2019 hearing happened. Judge Dozier issued an order. A lot of other stuff was going on during that year, probably additional discovery, et cetera, et cetera. On December 15th, PFS and the city attorneys file a brief. So as we'll see in the next set of slides, this brief, okay, we're in December 15th of 2019, represented that an RFP took place that complied with bidding requirements. And additionally, the brief stated that the contract was awarded to the lowest responsible, quote, the lowest responsible bidder, which is language that refers to an RFP process. So on slide 64, again, looking at the brief, looking at what was submitted to court, the brief was dated, excuse me, the brief was dated December 15th. It was docketed December 16th. But here's what it says, quote, "In accordance with bidding requirements, the city publicly issued a request for proposals for parking management services, comma, responses to which were due on July 28th of 2018. See Chester RFP at Exhibit B. On July 24th, 2017, PFS submitted a proposal and was later awarded the contract as the lowest responsible bidder." So that's a direct quote from the brief. And I'll note here that that RFP that was attached is the same document that we discussed earlier. So to look at this brief, this is what it's saying. An RFP was issued. Its due date was July 28th, 2017. PFS responded on July 24th, and that PFS was awarded the contract as the lowest responsible bidder. But if we go back to the September 13th City Council action resolution, which directed that all bids be returned unopened, how could you know this? How could you know that PFS responded on July 24th if the bids were returned unopened? And that also, the statement here also in the brief appears to conflict with the mayor's testimony at the July 9th, 2019 hearing that there was no advertising or formal RFP process. And so that becomes, the question there as well. Again, it seems to us to be sort of in conflict. And again, it's all this is inconsistent with the fact that on September 13th, City Council rejected all the bids and voted to reauthorize advertising for it. So if you voted to reauthorize advertising for it on September 13th and rejected all the bids, that July 24th, 2017 bid would have been rejected. And they would have had to submit a new bid. But the July 24th bid, at least the way we're reading this and we're interpreting all this, would have had to have been rejected. So again, the summary here, and I'm almost finished, is that this brief submitted to Judge Dozier says an RFP process took place. It was in compliance with bidding requirements. PFS submitted a bid on July 24th. PFS later was awarded the contract as the lowest responsible bidder. And again, the September 13th, 2017 City Council resolution was not referenced at all or explained at all in this brief that we saw. And I don't know. I would submit to you was probably relevant to have some conversation or at least some explanation for it. Again, unless we're misinterpreting what it said or what it did. So again, in terms of conclusion here from our end, and again, as we're looking at this contract holistically, and we've looked at the terms of the contract, we've had an expert come in, their take on it. We are trying to figure out the city's financial situation and what's in the best interest of the city moving forward. But even looking at the timeline over here and that information that we reviewed, it raises concerns here in terms of how this contract was procured. And so again, we've got the timeline on here. And then next steps, we'd appreciate input from the MFRAC committee about taking further action, including whether to terminate the contract between the city and PFS, and the receiver will obviously take this input into consideration as he is required to do under Act 47 in coming to a decision. And that concludes this section.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kapoor. That lengthy presentation. Tell you put a lot into this. The team has put a lot into this, and we're just appreciative of the work that you brought forward. As we've done here throughout, opening it up to the full committee for any questions of Mr. Kapoor or myself.
Thank you. Go ahead. Grace, go ahead.
Okay, I didn't, if I'm not mistaken, this is the contract where the city receives no revenue, no anything from it. Is that correct? I mean, you didn't go over everything because we've heard it previously, but I just wanted to hear it.
In the current situation, what the city has received is $330,000 payment, and is not that's been it.
With
Thank
that
you.
question, oh, sorry.
No, I just said thank you, sir. Go ahead, Councilman.
With that question, you raised one additional one for me. Say we're not receiving any money, which you're correct. The city is not receiving any monies from the parking contract currently. Can you explain why that is? I think there may have why the city is not receiving any financials from the parking authority or GATSO, I guess, or PFS. Not sure which the proper name to use, but can you explain that? So I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it is in the contract for the city to receive funding, but we are currently not. So can you explain that?
Sure. So what's happening at the moment with the contract is that in order for and I referred to this, well, there's two things. One is the contract has certain triggers after a certain number of parking meters are approved that would allow them to receive additional upfront payments for a total of $1 million. Now, to be clear, in the document, those are referred to as an advance. So it's unclear whether the city would have to pay those back out of what I'll refer to as revenue shares. So the PFS has not installed all the meters yet. Part of that is due to ongoing litigation with Widener. And so their position is that they're not able to do that. And so as a result of that, the revenue provision is not able to start.
Has yourself or your team looked into the litigation with Widener? And I say that because I believe the litigation may be going on 3 or 4 years at this point. Where are they at with litigation? And from my understanding, it's about who owns the right of way of some sorts.
Yeah, so without sort of getting into the actual substance of what exactly the issues are before Judge Dozier, what I can say is two things. So one is that litigation is ongoing. They're currently still in the discovery phase right now. I believe it's set for trial later on this year. The other thing is, just kind of going back to it, I know this is dating us back. The receivers team actually sought to intervene in that matter initially, and PFS vehemently opposed us doing that. Even after the judge granted us intervention status, they asked for reconsideration and appealed, things to the Commonwealth Court level. And our view on this was that this was just going to delay really kind of addressing the situation with the contract. So that matter is still in litigation. I don't anticipate it being resolved anytime soon. Unfortunately, where the city is right now is we have budgeted $325,000 as from Widener in our budget this year. Widener, as I mentioned previously, has offered the city offered a settlement, if you will. That would be $325,000 a year for 10 years. That could go to the general fund. And saying, without having parking meters or other type of parking programs on its campus, and we budgeted that. So the question is, where do we kind of go from there?
Thank you.
Yep.
I mean, if this committee recommended terminating or whatever, I mean, based on even what Councilman Morgan said, I mean, there's litigation already involved. There will likely be litigation behind terminating a contract. I mean, the costs, there's always costs, it seems, borne by the city of Chester, and it's just not fair. How do we get to a point? I mean, if we terminate it and magically start over, who says, okay, yeah, because there's so many moving parts with this. I'm a solicitor that said it's okay to sign this, I'm assuming, versus somebody else that just said, I'm going to sign it and move it forward. I mean, and at the end of the day, the city of Chester is not receiving anything behind this except more costs to pay for legal expenses, probably. So how do we say terminate knowing that we'll be going to court to pay, and paying for something more.
So Director Bracy, my guess is the entity that's actually going to get sued is not the city, it's going to be us. It's going to be.
Say that again, sir? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I said, in terms of, assuming the contract is terminated, or the receiver decides to terminate the contract, the entity I think that would be sued would be the receiver and not the city. This would be the receiver acting under his authority under Act 47 to terminate the contract. And again, as we've sort of listed over here, there are concerns. Again, whether or not this is the law or not, I'm not the attorney here to address it here, but there are concerns about how this was procured. And I think all of us know if you don't procure a contract properly in the public sector, there's no contract.
I have a question. You mentioned in a previous meeting, there was a termination penalty and that the receiver is going to seek to remove that. Was that actually removed, or would that have to come from terminating this contract completely?
Right. So good question, Ms. Diaz. So here's where that stands. What we did was on February 4th of 2022, the receiver informed PFS that the contract was being modified to eliminate the liquidated damages penalty. What has been going on probably since prior to that is that PFS has actually sued the receiver, essentially arguing that the receiver is outside of his power to do this. And that is that there was a hearing in front of Commonwealth Court, and Commonwealth Court indicated in a 3-judge panel, and again, I will apologize to the lawyers if I'm getting this wrong, and I'll be happy to correct it if I do, that the venue for this would be before Judge Seisler, who is our judge, if you will, the receiver's judge, if you will, in this matter. And so that matter is before her, the modifying it. If the receiver is going to seek to terminate the contract, I think what will likely happen is, in addition to the modification, the issue of termination will also be before the judge. And so, so Director Bracy, to your point of litigation, it's already happening. And if anything else, it's going to be added to what is already here.
Thanks.
I don't know if the mayor can speak to this. He wasn't at the last meeting when we had a pretty healthy conversation about this, or he was on, I'm not sure. But the question being, does the city believe they have a contract here? The receiver's done his work, your work, you guys are determining all that you've played out here, but I haven't heard from the city. Does the city believe there's a contract here that's worthy of keeping in place when the city's not receiving anything?
Director Bracy, we do believe we have a contract. We do believe things were in place and we were to receive significant funding. But as was stated earlier, it went into court. Widener took the parking authority to court because of the meters that were placed on Widener's property. So therefore, that kind of halted the financial progress that would have come from the placement of the meters in the city. We're still in conversation with the parking authority, but once again, they're in litigation with not only Widener, but it's also something going on with the receiver's office as well.
Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome.
Still open for additional questions or comments from the committee. Just circling back to what was laid out on the last slide of consensus, and searching for some feedback here from the committee. Does that, to Director Bracy's question, is this a split here? What I'm ultimately hoping to hear from after we get through your questions or comments or some suggestions on where do we go from here. Unfortunately, yes, this probably will mean more litigation, but it's committing to a particular path. So again, opening it up to the full committee.
I'll just add this additionally, for a resident of Chester, an elected official of Chester, and just hearing the concerns prior to this contract of the parking issues in the downtown business district area of the city of Chester, and the ongoing parking concerns as economic development increases, potential economic development comes down to the city of Chester. There is a parking issue here in the business district area, similar to many other residential areas as well. As we all know that many households have 2, 3, or 4 different cars as well without a driveway. If this contract is to be voided, the question I would have is, where do we go from here? There are on record of business owners in this downtown business district area that has come to council meetings because of the issues with parking surrounding the Avenue of the States. If the individuals on this call do not know, we have a SEPTA or transportation center here in the city of Chester, where many individuals would park their vehicles here and take the train station to Philadelphia, Delaware, so that they can go to work. And none of those individuals will patronize the businesses here in the downtown business district area. So again, I know that some of the business community came to mayor and council asking for a solution, to try to find out how they can, I guess, get more patrons to their businesses. And this was one of the thoughts that that was put forth. But if we do void this contract, again, I think we just need to look at what our options are moving forward, because I do believe that there's development opportunities on the rise, and more so than in the past 10 years, 15 years, our downtown business district area is beginning to thrive again, as many of the businesses are no longer vacant, they are being occupied. And we need to make sure that we can be supportive of those businesses, and the individuals, the residents here can be as well. So that's all I have.
And Mr. Receiver, if I may add to that, I think that modification of a contract should be considered rather than voiding the contract altogether. A lot of work has gone into trying to better our community, make sure that our residents were able to park in our own communities within the community. And so I think that we have something in place that has helped our businesses downtown, as the councilman said. If there needs to be modification, no contract is ever perfect, but if there needs to be modification, I would hope that we would move in that direction.
I think that was going to be one of my other questions as well, too. I mean, how has this contract or this process, because I can't call it a process, gentlemen, a contract. There's too many loose ends and uncertainties and RFP deadline. It doesn't seem like it was a legitimate contract. I'll just say that. But if this process is helping what you're trying to achieve in terms of parking and providing your business owners and residents with the reprieve that they need, I get that. And parking is one of those ills in most cities across the Commonwealth. So if you have found a solution, okay. And maybe modifying it is the better way if that's even legally possible. But I mean, you can't just turn a blind eye to how this went down. Your council told you not to do it. It sounds like you did do it. We got other folks that didn't even have a opportunity to bid or were told we're not going to open yours, but then this one got it. It just, and then for me, again, no revenue to the city. I understand the process and the litigation and everything that put a halt to that, but you're not even getting any revenue. And I don't know what the projections would have been if everything would have turned out right. It doesn't seem like it was ever going to come to the city from our earlier presentation. And it just seems like something should. That's usually one of the first things in the recovery plans: increase meter fees, get parking enforcement together, and those sorts of things that generate revenue for municipalities. And to not be able to speak to that or have any of that, I don't know what a modification, how do you modify it so that you can get that and even start over and have a legitimate contract?
I may jump in. Given the concerns with the procurement process, I don't think modification is an option at this point. I think termination would be the only thing, basically starting over. And getting back to Councilman Morgan's question or concern, yes, this would pretty much put us back to square one. I think from there we would engage in a formal bidding process, bringing in vendors, interviews, et cetera. And then once a vendor is identified, or perhaps it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg, but with that vendor going through a public planning process where the business owners, residents, et cetera, are all engaged in the process, and a parking plan is developed for the city, and then we execute from that plan. So I think that would be our path forward if my understanding is correct. Mr. Kapoor, would you mind correcting me?
And if you don't mind, sir, could you put a timeline on that? And I only say that to Councilman Morgan's point. I mean, you can't just terminate something today without something ready to go tomorrow.
Sure. I mean, so Director Bracy, so one option, right, would be to give a notice of termination on a date in the future. Right. So terminated as of a certain date. Right. So that gives you the time, because we agree. I mean, this is like, you're not going to.
And I'm not really talking about the logistics and the legal part of it. What do the residents and the business owners get from that termination by this date, and what happens while you're bidding out and stuff when they were making progress?
Well, I'm not sure they were making progress first. That's the first thing, right? The second thing is, I'm not sure if they're any worse off. And again, to Councilman Morgan's point, I understand there were some business owners who were looking forward. We've also spoken with business owners who've not been pleased with what's going on there. And you know, there in my mind, if we're looking at the parking issue, you've got the residential parking issue, right? The residential parking permit program, and you got the meters. Those in my mind, I mean, they're both parking, but in terms of how you address them, you can address them differently, right? With the residential parking, you could have an individual literally go around and do that, right? That's check to see whether they have a permit or not, whether they've been there for 2 hours or whatnot, and you can do that. The meters, it would be different, and I think in that case, you know, anything we're doing here is going to take some transition time. I think that's absolutely true. You know, you know, and again, the question is right now, do you know, what are those next steps? Right. And we have been thinking about those internally as to what could be done. And in terms of a time frame, you know, how long that would take, we need to, you know, we obviously need to look at it. But again, I mean, as we saw from the first part of the presentation, we've also got the whole water monetization and the retiree benefit stuff going on too. So at some point, we're trying to handle a bunch of things at once, and we're sort of trying to stage it as kind of best we can.
All right, if I may, just want to circle back to a point raised about the potential penalty that was in the contract. Mr. Kabor, could you speak to the modification and what, if anything, the city may owe a vendor if this contract is terminated for concerns about procurement?
So, I mean, let's let it go forward with that, right? And let's assume for a moment, and again, we don't think this is the case, but let's assume for a moment, a court finds that we're liable for the $12 million liquidated damages penalty. Obviously, what's that going to do to us? Like, I think everybody saw our first part of the presentation, right? And everybody saw that we have bankruptcy authorization. I mean, I think it's pretty clear what we would need to do. And so, you know, that again, as we sort of kind of, you know, play out what are the various different scenarios. Again, who knows what it would go, who knows how we would decide or whatnot, but that is certainly a plausible scenario for how this could play out.
One of scenario that could play out but if you could speak just to remind folks of your comment earlier about the modification that was sought in February and the path that we're contemplating here.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Mr. Seaver?
The modification in February, could you remind everyone what action was taken at that point in regard to the $12 million penalty?
So we modified the contract to say that was removed from the contract. I'm sorry, Mr. Seaver, is that what you're sort of getting at here?
Yeah, the question was kind of framed of, dare I say, damned if you do, damned if you don't. So on one hand, you stay in the current relationship and the city is not receiving any additional revenue and does not seem positioned to reach the 1,500 meter requirement that's in it. So the revenue sharing does not kick in, the term does not kick in. You kind of continue on indefinitely in this current state of not receiving any additional revenue from parking. On the other hand, if you move to terminate, while the $12 million penalty was originally out there, we saw a modification in February. No matter which way we go, the city is screwed? Is there a recommendation on which route is more beneficial to the city and what the associated cost may be?
You know, at the end of the day, so I know we're talking about a lot of hypotheticals, but to really kind of drive this home for it to make sense. And I'm not speaking for PFS here, and I don't intend to speak for PFS here. It would be very hard, I think, for PFS to be able to make this contract work financially for them without having meters or something from Widener. Widener doesn't want to do it. Widener has an injunction. And that case has been out there for several years. So at the end of the day, like, we're all talking about hypotheticals over here. I think from a financial perspective, without meters on that campus, it doesn't work for PFS financially. You know, I don't want to speak for them, but that's my hypothesis on this. And so, you know, we can sit around here and continue to kind of do this dance about what do you do, you know, let's meet, let's figure out, let's try and modify it. But at the end of the day, if the numbers don't work, the numbers don't work. And the question becomes, what's in the best interest of the city? Is it better to get $325,000 a year for a decade that we can put into the city's general fund and use as we wish? Or is it better to, go with the revenue sharing or modify the contract to look at the revenue share? I mean, that's really the choice we have at the end of the day. So really to kind of put a fine point on it, we've been looking at it, we've been thinking about it. We've certainly, in prior times had conversations with PFS, but at the end of the day, we keep coming back to this issue. And that's really the question before us, about what's in the best interest of the city, what's, you know, what do we do right now?
Thank you. Thank you for indulging me there. Don't want to delay the meeting any longer. Are there any comments from the committee in closing on either issue, parking or the authorization? All right. We're hearing none. I want to send a thank you again to Mr. Kapoor for pulling all of this together. Thank you. Job well done. In closing, I also want to extend a thank you to DA Stolzheimer and the Pennsylvania State Police for their recent partnership and increased activity here in the city. The community policing is critical and important, and I'm hoping that this relationship continues to pay dividends into the future. So thank you to all involved, and namely Commissioner Gretzky for making this all possible. So thank you for that. If there are nothing else from the committee, I think we are going to adjourn until the second Tuesday in June.
I just wanted to thank VJ as well. I mean, he made this very understandable for everyone, and your team did a great job with the presentation. Good luck, and thank you for sharing the problems as well as potential solutions. Thank you for your work.
Yes, ma'am. All right.
Thank you, Director Bracy. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.